Okay, so the recording is on, and Karen, you want to open up and just say something about the program, and then we'll go on and I'll kind of explain how.
Sure. I just want to thank all of our presenters for doing a wonderful job as part of the Locally Grown series. These are workshops that Panelists is hosting around New York State, which really emphasize best practices by local practitioners. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. This has been a really great series, and it's continuing to the end of March.
Okay, terrific. We actually had one other join us. So benefit me just put up. If you've just joined us, please dial in to hear audio. And I think we just had one other person. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so why don't we do it this way? We said we're going to try to be a bit informal about these. So it would supposed to be follow-up from the sessions that you all did on-site around the state. So why don't we actually start by kind of going around to the people who are here. And can you just take a minute and talk a little bit about what your topic was? So maybe we'll start with Amy. Amy.
Great. Hello, everybody. Amy Piper here. I did a presentation in Buffalo, West Seneca, BOCES, and we talked about data-driven instruction and response to intervention and how we can use both of those things to rejuvenate teachers and motivate teachers and use data to drive instruction. Great discussion, great ideas, great. It was good presentation.
Okay. Getting somebody's conversation in the background.
Like with certain aspects of this responsibility.
Okay, I don't know who we're getting. I may have to mute. I don't really want to do that, but he had us on hold, as I said. Okay, so if it gets noisy, I'll mute. But okay, Dan, you want to take over and talk about your session? You're in Jericho, right?
Yeah, this is Don Gately. I'm the principal at Jericho Middle School, and my session was devoted to using 21st century tools to leverage your efforts to communicate and collaborate within your communities, and really, to lead. And I thought we had a great couple of hours talking about, using different tools to sort of answer a sense of questions of leadership, like, how do I connect with my community? How do I build consensus and things like that? So I thought it was a great session, and we had a great conversation.
And then Dan, maybe you share a little. Dan Shornstein, you want to share a little? You were in Arlington, right?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Titusville Intermediate School Principal. So our workshop was on unclogging the RTI process and meeting the needs of all learners, and it really focused on the work of restructuring our school to include an intervention and enrichment block, and how we have teacher PLCs to help design and implement interventions and help monitor student progress and through progress monitoring and data reviews. And I think it was a good workshop. We had about 27 people that came, which spoke to this pressing need that everybody's struggling with this topic.
I think it was very nice. This is Karen, but I think it was very nice too, Dan, that you offered your attendees the opportunity to actually watch an intervention block in progress before the end of the school day and before the actual workshop, which, I'm not sure if anyone was able to do that in terms of their schedule, but it was a nice thing.
Yeah, we had about 8 people that came and spent time in the classrooms, and I always find that that's the best learning, when people can see,
And I think that was objectives of being the locally grown, too, was that people would have a chance not just to meet presenters, but also maybe visit some schools and sites, as opposed to always going to a conference center, but actually coming to other people's districts. So we have 2 participants here today, and I assume both of you were able to dial in. So I believe we have Margaret and Susan. Are you with us, Susan, too? Were you able to dial in? I couldn't tell. But we definitely have Margaret, right?
Yes.
All right, Margaret. So not to put you on the spot, but, because this was supposed to be online follow-ups, any questions that you might have? I think you were in Don's session, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought it was very well laid out. I thought he was very responsive to the questions that the group had. It was a lot of information, and some of the participants had more experience, hands-on experience than others, and I think he was able to navigate that really very, very well. I thought it went really well. I learned a lot.
Okay. Sounds good. Any questions you want to ask? I know that
Thanks, Margaret.
But
Oh, no. I'm following you now, Don, on Twitter.
oh, okay.
There you go.
You're doing it that way. All right. So if we don't get questions, the approach we usually do is I'll ask you just, some general questions about your session. Obviously, I wasn't there, so they're broad enough so that maybe for someone who didn't attend, they could get a better sense of maybe some of the areas that were covered. So I'll kind of start in the opposite direction. Maybe we'll start with Dan Shornstein. So you talked about RTI, right? That was your topic?
Yes.
Did I get that right? I want to make sure. It's late in the day. So what were some of the major questions that the participants asked, that were, or areas of concern that they wanted you to focus on?
Well, one of the things that we had half the people from middle school, and we focused on how to create to cut the bureaucracy of the amount of paperwork involved in this process. And I was sharing how we completely eliminated an RTI referral and really took the burden of having to refer a child away from the teacher and made that more of a automatic referral out of a data meeting review. And I think that was a question about how do you do that, because that's a complete change of decision making and scheduling meetings with kids who just are not making the kind of progress. And in the past, we put the focus on the teachers to have to make those referrals, and we just made that a shared process. So that was interesting because there was questions around. It's hard for people to wrap their head around that because they're so used to a certain system they've always worked with. And then the other ones just had to do with the actual interventions that we're using and how we progress monitor and how we have time to actually do that because we've been creating our own interventions. So that had to do with teachers working together. So, it really had to do more with the process of getting work done and how we can, how we've changed the system. And the main thing was it took years. This is not something that happened within a year or two. It probably took about 7 years of evolving this process.
That's good to hear, Dan.
And it's still a work and it's still a major work in progress, obviously.
Yeah. Anything else maybe you want to share that you think? Go ahead, Karen. Did you have something you wanted to say? Or Margaret? Was that you, Karen?
Yeah, I was just saying I really like the thought of eliminating individual teacher referrals and going to more of a data-driven collaborative process. I think that's great. I just had a question for Dan, or for anyone who may know. What do we know about the name, the acronym of RTI changing? MTSS? Anybody hearing about that?
No, tell me.
I don't know much about it either. It's just sometimes I just kind of hear things in the air, and I just heard this little thing about the change in the term.
This is Amy. In the meetings that I've had, This is Amy. In the meetings that I've had with State Ed, we haven't talked about switching the title over from RTI to MTSS. It's more becoming more aware of MTSS, but at this point, State Ed isn't ready to move and switch over the acronym.
What is MTSS? I know what RTI is. What's the acronym? Okay.
It's multi-tiered systems of support. It's really aligning CBIS with RTI and doing the full, the gamut of both of them.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And so was your topic also on RTI, Amy?
It was.
Okay. So what were I may as well, since we're both on RTI, so what were some of the areas of concern that some of the participants had in your area? By the way, I got contacted by someone from your area that wanted their teachers as a group to participate in this. But I told them
Wow.
we would make the recording available. So if there are any insights, either for administrators or teachers, and I'll email you who it was so you know who it was.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I think that the biggest dilemma that comes up is, of course, scheduling. How to fit in the time for students to be pulled for RTI, and I'm sure Dan runs into this as well. How do you pull one or two kids for a Tier 3 session? But also it's the paradigm shift with teachers and having the understanding of not the test and place model really isn't around anymore. And what we know through research is doing the response to intervention model. So really following that protocol and the importance of an administrator to lead the school. The administrator really has to take the time to show that this is so important that it takes precedence over everything else, and then the teachers will follow that lead. Whereas if an administrator sort of lets somebody else run it and isn't real involved, then the buy-in isn't there, and that's the frustration I was getting from, there was a teacher there that was talking about that a little bit, but really the importance of the administrator to model that.
That's so important, Amy, because whatever we spend time with as leaders is what we communicate to our teachers. What's really important, and if we talk about children regularly and really, really join them, they appreciate that. And it's all about accountability. But I don't find a pushback on that because I think underneath it all, they appreciate the effort we're making to help meet the needs of kids and to provide ways to put support in place rather than criticizing teachers for not doing enough. And I think that's the difference when it works. People realize, wow, this is not something I'm doing on my own. Actually, this is support.
And I think too, if the administrator's there, some of the questions that might arise that people don't know the answers to or make assumptions about don't happen because the administrator's there, guiding everybody, showing the expectations, and so the understanding, the level of understanding is much better.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I hear that a lot from teachers, too, as someone who does staff development. Here we are, we're doing a big initiative, and we're in with training. They're bringing in a specialist, and the principal's not there,
Exactly. Yeah,
so,
exactly.
The problems there, obviously. First of all, besides the symbolic aspect of support, then we're not all on the same page in terms of having knowledge, and you don't know staff concerns, so how can you overcome them if you didn't sit in? So
exactly.
When it's
and
so easy.
Come in and, yeah. So we spent some time talking about, look at the data at the classroom level, grade level, building level, and really how RTI needs to start with the individual teacher, with the response intervention model, and how data feeds into that. But, we talked about how really RTI is the umbrella that everything falls under. I like the term MTSS, but New York State's not ready to go there yet. But really, everything we do is responding to students' needs.
Anything else that came up? First of all, would you say most of the people are kind of along in this process good? I know it's obviously been a mandate for a while, but did they get a sense of being along, or is it still struggling to get it off the ground?
I think people are struggling. I think most schools are struggling because the infrastructure is not in place. It's still focused on teacher by teacher. I mean, at Arlington, I started data meetings 6 years ago, and now we have 8 elementary schools. Every school now, principals are sitting with teachers 3 times a year, going over progress of kids individually. That alone is a profound shift, and because from there things happen. But if you actually take the time,
coming from? What are some of the typical data points you're using for those discussions?
We use Fontes and Panel, so we'll do 3 data points a year, usually or 2, the fall, middle of the year, the end of the year for their reading benchmark. We have comprehension screeners that we do 3 times a year. We do some math fluency. We use units of study for ELA and math, so we look at the end of a unit, the results. And that gives me a lot of information. The state test, I'll look at, but it's kind of it's a static. It's not a very moving number because it's,
not dynamic.
So,
Dan, what level are you again? I'm sorry.
We're intermediate. We're grades 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
So we'll look at the spreadsheet. In fact, I'm looking at it right now because I just got them printed out because we're about to start data meetings, and I can. It's just immediately I'll look at a class and I'll see 4 kids I'm concerned about, and that's a big focus of the meeting. And then the question is then, these are kids we might need to have an RTI meeting on. But then there becomes a whole support. In the past, the kids would just fall through the cracks because I didn't have a way to pinpoint them unless the teachers brought them up. And that's a very, that's the biggest change that's happened. And I think the other principals in my district have found that as well because they actually like it. They actually like having these meetings.
By the way, do you run the data meetings, or do you have teacher leaders involved?
I do, but some of the other principals like to have a small team. I just don't like pulling too many people out of program. But I know Amy does that very effectively. When I heard her workshop at the convention in October, is that correct, Amy? You have a whole team that reviews the data together.
Yeah, we do. We have a grade level representative, and we shift through the grades throughout the day. But I run the meetings.
Right.
But we rotate teachers through, yeah.
And that's really great because everybody hears what people are doing and understanding what's important. And I actually like that model better. I'm just used to doing it this way. But I really loved what I heard when you were sharing the work that you do.
Amy, what level are you?
I'm kindergarten through 4th grade.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I'll just share something. I was out in Indiana a few years ago, and I just loved the terminology, but we were in early foundational times looking at how to look at student work and looking at data and classroom instructions, and this was regional.
Sorry about that, yeah.
Each one of the principals brought what they called a data diva.
A data diva?
Data diva, who was a classroom teacher who had expressed an interest in becoming more knowledgeable about how to understand and analyze data. And that person was like a second person in the building who could work with teachers. So in some cases, if they had, meetings that were at the same time, the principal would take one and the data diva would do the other. And the idea was eventually to build a crop of data divas, or whatever the male version.
I love it. That's great.
So you're actually growing your leadership, the skills within teachers to not just be able to analyze data, but also to be facilitators.
I think that's so important because the transient nature of administration, unfortunately, is so true. We were able to hire some people in my district this year, and I'm doing the same thing. I feel like it's the same thing, coaching them how to be these data leaders. So if I can't be there for part of the day or whatnot, I have someone that feels confident in running those meetings, and everybody.
Do you have any data dudes?
Well, you may not
data dudes
yet.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah,
awesome.
You have a minute.
Yes. And it's not even a bad alliteration. If we only had the third one, determined data divas, then we really would work. Yeah.
That is great.
There you go.
But just this notion of, a more ownership. And it builds potential leadership, too, So, maybe is it Dan or Don? I think I got your name wrong.
Donald, yeah.
Don, sorry about that. So, Don, your session was on 21st century schools. You want to talk and maybe elaborate a little bit more about what you covered and some of the major questions that people asked, or kind of the direction you went in conversation in your session?
I think one of the things that when I've had an opportunity to facilitate these discussions, I've tried to emphasize is that it's not about the tools. We talked about, when we transitioned from fountainhead, from fountain pens to ballpoint pens, they may or may not have had workshops on how to use ballpoint pens and the implications of the fact that the kids can be writing anywhere they want now because they're carrying a ballpoint pen around in their pocket. These are just better tools to help us, sort of leverage our leadership to, transform what's happening in our buildings. Even if you start with the question, who do you find inspiration from and collaborate with? I would even put that out to the people in this group here. Where do you find your inspiration from? And who do you who do you collaborate with on a on a consistent basis?
Mhm.
Who do you collaborate with? And
I think
get
it's the
inspiration
people
from?
that are interested. Collaborating with the people that are interested, that are eager, like your native divas that want to, find out more, and this is their thing.
Yeah. Where do you see them, and how do you talk to them?
A lot of times it's informal conversations in the hallway, or as they're walking.
So these are people in your schools and in your district?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Maybe you go to a conference sometimes. You meet people at conferences. I know I heard Dan say he heard Amy speak at a conference.
Yeah.
So we talked about, different tools to connect you to people all the time. So in my session, we did a Google Hangout with a principal from Merton, Wisconsin, who actually was the principal of the year in Wisconsin, middle level principal of the year, Jay Posick, and he talked to us about things that were going on in Wisconsin via a Google Hangout. I'm in something called the Voxer group with Jay, as well as and other middle school principals from across the country in St. Louis, in Duluth, Minnesota, Wisconsin, in Connecticut, in St. Louis, as well as in Kentucky. So I'm in a group of about 14 people. So that's the sort of asynchronous conversation that goes on just constantly via this app called Voxer that's on my phone. And we talked about how I'm also using Voxer to give teachers feedback by, as part of my process, as I visit classrooms, I will give them informal feedback and then send them a little voicemail that they get in their mailbox, and I'll just say it was a great opportunity for me to stop in your classroom. And I played some of that for the participants to see how that captures a different tone than if you were to email people. And it answers that question. Well, I visited 25 classrooms. It's really hard for me to run around and get them all to that face-to-face. So, we talked about that tool and other. I think the important thing is to just talk about those essential questions in leadership, how you can harness different technologies to help you do it better. Another question we talked about is how are you a continuous learner? How do you continue to learn? I don't know what answer. I would again throw that question out to this group of leaders in this conversation. How do you continue to learn?
Mhm. Challenge yourselves, right?
I'm sorry. I
go to conferences. No.
You read.
I think
read,
that
you read a lot of books. You go to some workshops.
Yeah. I learn by spending as much time as I can in classrooms and having conversations, because I need to see. I need to. It has to be dynamic for me. I mean, I can read, but I need to make the connection to really see.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the most exciting when I can just
and
deliberately
learning is
put
really
myself
social too, right? We learn socially too by interacting. That's a big piece of it. So, in our session, we talk heavily about being involved in Twitter as a professional learning tool and engaging in Twitter chats that take place regularly. And I shared a sort of database of Twitter chats that take place throughout really the world. On Saturday mornings, there's a Twitter chat called Sat Chat that has hundreds of people from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Brazil, as well as in this country, devoted to different topics like RTI, like differentiation, like literacy, and all through, a tool like Twitter, so that, learning is happening, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and everywhere. It's kind of across geographical boundaries. So I showed them how to use S'more to build your newsletters so you can track the communication that you have with parents via a S'more newsletter, and how you can storify using that app to bring together all the pictures and to build a story, a narrative, and a brand for what your school's about. And the more that you connect with the community by making sure like the parents in my school's community, they don't, when their kids come home and say they didn't do, when they say, what did you do at school? And we know a typical middle school kid comes home and tells their mom, nothing. And those parents know that's not true because they're following us on Twitter and they just see, sort of a stream of information that's being put out about the great stories that are happening in our classrooms. That really builds support and sort of social capital for when you want to bring about, transformation and start a new initiative. You start from a place where you have the confidence and support of your community. So, we talked about things like that, and I thought it was a great conversation.
I'm curious now. You're on Long Island, right,
Yes.
Don? So one of the things that I've noticed, and of course it's kind of fall by the wayside, but at one point, you guys on Long Island had some of the best listservs, administrator lists. And in fact, nobody else around the state had anything like it. I was chatting with people in Westchester and telling them that you had like an extremely great aspiring administrator listserv. There were principal listservs, and they were pretty actively maintained. I'm going blank for a moment. Who did them? Mike Keeney and Bill. Actually,
Mike Keeney, right? Mike and Bill, and Mike has now, Mike migrated more over to Leadership 2.0.
Right, because
he no longer
their own way.
The listserv off to I'm not sure, one of the Long Island BOCES still administrates that listserv. The middle level principals listserv is still very active, but again, I think Twitter is that listserv on steroids. It's that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just all the time. It's a version of it. I think if you're looking at the listserv and how cool that is, and how it keeps people in touch, this is just 10 times better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just I just think that it's how interesting how some parts of the state have been more ahead of the curve on that kind of stuff than others.
On the technology pieces,
about using is, believe it or not, is closed Facebook groups. Also,
right. Yeah. Huh. We talked about Facebook. We talked about Instagram. Yeah.
Twitter is so much better, I think, for school leaders because Facebook, when you post something on there, you get a million responses, and you can start some peppers in a teapot. And a tweet is a tweet, and it's a sweet thing. I love Twitter.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Fewer characters has its benefits. Brevity.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. But it's a great place too for sharing of resources. If like you want to look up articles or resources or programs and people to get in contact with. And I have started relationships through Twitter that then deepened. And I've done Google Hangouts with people and set up school visits that I've through contacts I made through Twitter. So and then that directs me to people's blogs. And I show people my blog and how I use it to communicate with the community and with the world and make connections. So workshop ideas that I have and refine thoughts about initiatives and things like that.
So, Don, I actually have another question for you, just more curiously. One of the things that I've noted, you're middle school, right, or high school?
Yes, middle school.
So one of the challenges around the state, and I've seen this, is, the high school groups, for the most part, around the state, we have really active high school associations where they're coming out to meetings. And the same thing is true with middle school. But when it comes to elementary, it's really hard for some of the principals to get out of the building. They don't have as many assistant principals in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So elementary principals groups always struggle, for attendance at their regular meetings. And I wonder if any of them have looked to doing hangouts as an option, because you lose a lot of time going back and forth to the meeting. They could do more online.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Or even do a hybrid. If you want to come, you come, and if you can't, you can log in. So I think that's just another direction to go. We shouldn't, because it is a struggle for people where they find it hard to get out of their building. And as you know, if you go to areas of the state where the geography is long, a 1-hour meeting's a 4-hour obligation
Right.
in the North Country. So.
That's a great idea. That's a really great idea. Again, you're using that tool and bringing people together. That's a great idea.
All right.
The elementary principals. That's my sense too. That they don't get together as much as do the secondary level people.
So maybe we can pilot that. Maybe we'll try piloting hybrid meetings. I'd love to chat with you about doing that.
Yeah.
That'd
be great.
Yeah.
One of the things I talked about was Ed Camp. I worked with a group of people to start Ed Camp Long Island. And Ed Camp, I don't know how much you guys know about that, but it's just really an unconference model of professional development in which people sign up for it and they come the day of. They're held on Saturdays. They're free, and we work to get sponsors. And actually, Sandy sponsored our lunch last year. We're very grateful for that. And we had nearly 300 people showed up on a Saturday. And there's a board that has rooms and times, and people just take Post-it notes and put up the section that they're going to facilitate. And it's a really participant-driven staff development. It's the most exciting thing I've seen in professional development, really in my career. It's been a real game changer for me.
And who are the participants? Yeah. Mostly teachers?
Yeah, we have our third annual Ed Camp Long Island will take place October 1st. It's not till October 1st. We already have 300 people signed up for it already. So
yeah, the Hudson Valley is starting to get involved with Ed Camp. That's happening more and more.
So now, where do you do it? It's for all of Long Island, so you do it like Mid-Island?
We do it in a school. We bounced around to different. We have the first year it was in East Williston. Last year it was in Jericho Middle School. This year it's at Burnham Middle School in Massapequa. So we try to move it around a little bit geographically, keep it in the middle. Right. So,
sounds great.
Yeah, I would just invite everybody to come, and my wife and I have gone. My wife is a curriculum director in East Williston, so she's in the business as well. And we've gone to Ed Camp New York City, Ed Camp Philadelphia, so we've seen some other ones. It's just a really great model. It's really taking off.
So Karen, today you were at a camp, right? So was that similar, even though it was on tech?
Yeah, I went to Google Camp in Minnesota today because we've established a great partnership with NiceGate. And
how cool. Right.
Sponsor Google Camps with them, and we help facilitate them and we promote them. So I'm nice and familiar with the model. I was also, it's funny you mentioned the October 1st event on Long Island because about a week and a half ago I met with the Nassau County Assistant Principals Group, and after that I was invited to come to that October 1st event, and so I'm going to try to be there. I think the camp model is great. One thing that's interesting is that today was the first Google camp, and I've been to a million of them because we co-sponsor them, that they actually called the Google Summit. And the one thing that the NiceGate leadership decided to change, starting with this one, was they're not developing the schedule on the fly in the morning, which is a real hallmark of the Ed camps, because what they found was a couple of things. First of all, the same kind, they can have, anticipation of what's going to come up, from newer things like cardboard to the kinds of things people always want to know. But other than that, what was happening was they would have a group of 300, and they would get topics up on the board and really just not have people to present them. They didn't have presenters to go with the topics. So they wanted to structure it a little bit differently. So today they went in with a schedule and presenters, which brings it to a more traditional model, but it was still very successful. So, it's all good, and it's all kind of a process of learning what works best.
Well, that's like the conference Bill Brennan's having in April. I think it's April 14th. I'm attending it called Connected Educators at Long Island, which is a sort of hybrid Ed Camp model. He does exactly that. The morning has structured workshops / conversations. Then in the afternoon, at lunch, he populates an Ed Camp style board, and people put up sessions and attend those. That's interesting. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have anything they want to share? I know you're the only participant, you're the only kind of guest. Margaret, any questions you want to ask any of these, your colleagues?
The only question with the RTI was they were using an acronym. I wasn't familiar with what it stands for. It wasn't the RTI. They kept talking about how the state was going to possibly change the acronym.
Oh, so she wasn't sure what the original RTI was? I think it's response to intervention, right?
No. I know.
No, that's the original.
The new one.
The one.
MT, that's what I asked too, Amy.
Multi-tiered systems of support. Multi-tiered systems of support.
Oh,
Okay.
Another easy acronym to remember.
Yeah.
I would like to just say something about that. So I when RTI started kicking in about 5-6 years ago or longer, and this whole idea of a tiered support of tier 1, tier 2, and moving kids through, I had such a reaction to it, and I still do, because I think it creates such a bureaucratic system that everybody worries, what tier is this kid on, whatever, instead of, are the kids learning or are they not learning? Are they getting help that's effective or not? And to hear that the state may be taking that on almost speaks to making things even more complicated. And the problem is that, RTI is response to intervention. Are the kids learning from the help they're receiving or not? And if they're not, then we need to figure out what to do. And the idea that we have to, moving into this RTI direct system, which a lot of school districts are now, really makes things even more complicated. And I don't know if there's any way to untangle it. I think it's almost like we're doomed to create even more bureaucracy, and it could be just me, because I tend to I just get very frustrated, and I see teachers trying to keep things simple, but I get concerned that we need to keep things simple, and we need to make the fewer meetings, we have to cut down on the paperwork, and we have to spend more time in action and make decisions that are going to result in less paperwork and less meetings and more time with kids. And I keep seeing more of the same, and I just get concerned whether people are really paying attention to creating more bureaucracy instead of less.
Well, and I think if you're doing authentic RTI, the opposite is true. You have less paperwork, less meetings. Kids are getting help more quickly, more devoted explicitly to their needs, specific skill sets. I think I'm about as simple as it gets, and I think our system is very basic. We've been doing it much like Dan for probably 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah, and I think you and I are in the same wavelength. And Amy, in my buildings, in my district, there's a 4-page referral that a teacher has to fill out. And here's what I've learned from that. It actually it sabotages an entire meeting, because you end up talking about things or looking at things that are not important.
Yeah,
keep it simple and focus in on what is the intervention and the support going to be. Not spending the last 4 minutes of the meeting. Now we'll figure out what to do. Let's drill down to what is this work sample and these assessments telling us, and let's make an executive decision now what we're going to spend time focusing on. We can't do everything. We've got to prioritize. But that was a huge shift for us, where we changed how the RTI meeting looks and feels, and away from spending so much time talk, and less on let's get down and what are we going to do, and then let's have a review and look at the work, the progress monitoring, the graphs, or whatever you want to use, charts, and really see if there's growth. Anyway, that's my soapbox talk.
I agree with everything you just said. I completely agree.
That's why the administrator needs to be there, though, because we can do that. We can make it succinct and say, this is what we're talking about. These are the points that need to be addressed. The rest of the stuff is minutia, and the paperwork's crazy.
Well, right. Yeah.
We do when we have our SAT meetings, we go right to CSA. The teacher doesn't fill out a referral. We have all the data from the meeting. Why do they need to fill out another referral? That's ridiculous.
That's a great point.
So I was in the district this week, and the principal coined a phrase. She called it administrivia.
Yeah.
I want to give her credit. Shelby.
One of my colleagues said that I love these meetings that we have where everyone sits around for 45 minutes and admires the problem.
Yeah.
Shoot me now. No.
Well, we can talk about this. As you can imagine, whenever people write mandates, they do this under the assumption that they're writing these for people who can't make judgments. They have to lay it all out. And in the real world, with professionals, there's a lot of things they don't need a form to know what they're supposed to do. And sometimes it becomes its own trap, where you're spending more time trying to figure out whether you're crossing your T's and dotting the compliance I's than whether you're really focusing on the needs of kids. But again, that's
my question for Dan and Amy was about those very good data meetings that you referenced, because I don't know if you agree that we really need protocols and leadership in those meetings, because they can really degenerate quickly into litanies of why we can't help this kid, litanies
Absolutely.
of things that are beyond our control, and
Or about the parent, or the story about the behavior, or the effort that's not being exerted.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens all the time.
They really got to be
Yeah.
structured, and people have to get used to that kind of protocol.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because my teachers will say to me or the school-based colleges especially will say, "You'll be there, right? Because you keep everybody on task."
Right.
You know.
Well, that is part of your
People
role.
appreciate it.
Hopefully you embed the culture. It's interesting. I won't mention what district, but I was doing work on Long Island this week with a group of administrators, and we were actually on this very conversation on how to make, data meetings and PLC meetings more effective in general. And certainly we talked about a lot of things you talked about, but there were a couple things that really came up. One was we shouldn't automatically assume that if we bring a group together with information, they'll know how to use it right. That
Right.
people need some training and guidance on this stuff. And the second, or the most broadest point, was we need to get away from looking at forests and looking at trees. And so when someone's talking about the kid got a 65 or he doesn't do his homework, that's a forest.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to look deeper. And when you start deeper, that's when you start to come up with solutions. And one of the people in the room, I forget which principal, said, the difference between a good school and a great school is not effort, it's focus. Some schools, they put a lot of effort in, but they're throwing it against the wall. And that in really good schools, we're focusing. We're putting our efforts where they're needed because we understand our learners best. And so we're able to in.
Here's something that I always found was really helpful in RTI, support intervention kinds of meetings. And we started to call it a menu. We need some kind of a menu so we don't always feel we're kind of grasping and inventing the ways that we're going to intervene. Like a lot of these things are very standard, and the more we can create really rich menus of interventions that really work, that are very concrete, the better the meetings go too. This is not.
Yes, and what you're saying also about the focus, Jeff, and what you just said about the menu, what the breakthrough for us here is that we started focusing on anchor or power standards as a way to provide a much clearer focus because we were spending too much time differentiating for this child or that child. It was just too much work. And what we were able to do is come up with interventions that were the most important representation of the skills that the kids needed to know in ELA and math. And it had to do with the gaps that we kept seeing in the assessments. And, a lot of it was nonfiction comprehension and writing and number sense and place value and fluency in math, word problems. It was, it's pretty consistent. So we've just basically said these are where the interventions mostly need to be. And then we now have a menu for the entire school that we use during the intervention block. Sometimes I feel like, this is such a top-down thing, but it really is working because we all are on the same wavelength and we're moving in the same direction. The teachers can do additional interventions, but having a menu or having a specific intervention that we have found work has made a huge help in the confusion or the amount of time we spend trying to decide what this kid needs, what that kid needs, and try to generalize a little more than we used to. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also then you have your own internal evidence because if you have a practice that's being done by a lot of people, you can prove it works as opposed to everybody kind of freelancing. Not that individual innovation is a great thing, but it's nice to establish best practices, and that's kind of a way of doing that.
Right. So when I have a data meeting with a teacher and they bring 6 kids worth of graphs and charts based on the interventions they've been doing, and 2 of the kids show very little progress on those charts representing the interventions, then I know we better get back to a meeting and put our heads together because something is off. We're not approaching this correctly. So that helps then get right into action to say we need to regroup. And in the past, that never happened. Teachers were adrift and on their own, and we didn't have that kind of link to the intervention evidence to whether we need to regroup and focus in on a RTI strategy meeting. And that's been the focus. I like that analogy about the trees and the tree. To me, that's where the focus comes in. And I think it's better. I mean, the teachers seem to be less stressed because it's more focused.
So anybody else have any added thoughts on either topic? Wrap up.
I could probably talk all day. I won't start.
Go ahead. Amy, did you want to say something?
No, I just said I could probably talk all day on this subject, but I think that's
sure
a great
you could.
It just reinforces what Don said. It's just beneficial when colleagues come together and have conversations.
Yeah.
No matter what. Do they do it as an online meeting or they do it through Twitter? You know. So.
Yeah, we're too often we are in our own silos. You know, even if we have a really healthy school culture, you know, it's hard. You work in a silo.
Yeah, true.
Yes, well, you know, I actually had I had someone say, you know, we're in such a people business, but it can be a very isolating business also.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of break that, and there are a lot of ways of doing it. This is one of them. So what do you say? Should we call it a day and let everybody go home, or continue their driving?
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
Those of you who are in the office, you'll get out soon, and for those of you driving, be careful driving, safe travels. And
all right, thanks everybody. It was nice talking to you. I learned a lot. I really learned so much from everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.